The shoguns of medieval Japan may be described as military dictators who ruled the country through a feudal system, in which military service and the loyalty of a vassal were bestowed in exchange for the patron of a lord. In 1192, the shogunate was established as an institution by the first proper shogun, Minamoto no Yoritomo. From that point on, the shoguns ruled for 7 centuries, until the 1868 Meiji Restoration. There were 3 major shogunates in Japanese history during this period: the Kamakura, the Ashikaga, and the Tokugawa. The rank of shogun was held by members of certain samurai warrior families who wielded great power and influence. There were governments run by regents between 1203 and 1333, acting on behalf of shoguns who were still minor or representing the actual power behind a weaker shogun. One final cog in this convoluted Japanese political chain was the emperor himself. While the country was ruled by the shoguns, the emperor still acted his part, but was mostly powerless and limited to ceremonial duties. He was nevertheless able to legitimize the shoguns by formally granting them their coveted title. But how did this first shogunate come about? It began with the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, during which the Minamoto clan defeated the Taira, and their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, became Japan's most powerful military leader. He then rose as Japan's first shogun and ruled between 1192 and 1199. As such, he was the original shogun of the Kamakura shogunate. The shogun's position was the first to provide an alternative governing structure to that of the Japanese imperial court. The title of shogun, or military protector, had already been used before, but it was merely a short-term position for military commanders on the campaign in the still disputed territory of northern Japan during the 8th century. The title shogun in this context was translated as commander-in-chief of the expeditionary force against the barbarians. Many years passed before the shogun title was revived by Yoritomo's cousin, Minamoto Yoshinaka, 1154 to 1184 AD, leader of the clan's forces in Heiankyo in 1183, despite not having received it from the emperor, as was the tradition. The shogun was initially the military leader of the samurai caste. While it was originally a temporary role, it evolved over time, acquiring more continuity and power, eventually becoming a central figure in Japanese politics, particularly in the 17th century. Yoritomo managed to keep the title of shogun with its new broader meaning because of his agreement with the young emperor Go-Toba, 1183 to 1198, who awarded the title to Yoritomo in exchange for military protection. The emperor was technically above the shogun, but the opposite was true in practice, as whoever controlled the army also held sway over the state. The emperors kept a ceremonial role, and their approval was still sought by the shoguns to lend a veneer of legitimacy to their rule. In fact, being granted the title by the emperor gave the shogun his status as protector of the nation, a helpful notion that meant he could resort to anyone and any means for whatever purpose he saw fit. Emperors could defer the appointment of a shogun, but not forever. At this stage in Japan's history, the title of shogun was not as honored as it would become in the 17th century. Yoritomo was succeeded as shogun by his eldest son Minamoto no Yorie, 1202 to 1203, but only following a power struggle. When Yoritomo died, his wife Hojo Masako, 1157 to 1225, and her father, Hojo Tokimasa, decided that they would rule, creating the rank of shogunal regent, Shikken, and pushing forward the interests of the Hojo clan. This arrangement, widely replicated throughout the Kamakura period, 1183 to 1333, meant that the regent had actual power and the shogun was a mere puppet, with both roles being filled by chosen members of the Hojo clan. Yet another change was to allow a regent to circumvent the requirement that a shogun had to come from the warrior class, and so achieve a powerful position that was otherwise unavailable to them. No written outline of the shogun's exact role and the absence of any legal definition meant that this was easily rigged by a lengthy line of regents to fit their purposes. It was not the shogun who governed Japan, but the rulership of the shogunate. This would not change until the establishment of the Ashikaga shogunate in 1338, when regents were rendered obsolete, and the shogun was once again the country's true leader. Nonetheless, the government apparatus shared power among prominent members of the Japanese military. A shogunate is a system of government in ancient Japan that arose in the 12th century. The shogunate government, also known as bakufu, or government from the curtain, in reference to its origins as a title held by a field commander, was based on the feudal relationship between lord and vassal. The shogun, or shogun regent, stood at the top of the social and political hierarchy and assigned land to fellow followers in exchange for their military personnel, somewhat reminiscent of the vassalage system that operated in parts of Europe during a stretch of the Middle Ages. The shogun was aided in the day-to-day administration by several ministers, officials, and institutions. Many were added to the government apparatus over time as it became increasingly complex. The most important of these was the vice shogun, kanre, a position usually held in rotation by a high-ranking member of one of three of the most powerful families: the Shiba, the Hosokawa, and the Hatekeyama. The position was introduced in 1333, and its main purpose was to be a liaison between the shogun and the regional military governors and their deputies. The samurai replaced the aristocracy in overseeing Japan's administrative functions in the 17th century, a transformation that led to them adopting roles such as scribes, accountants, and managers. These individuals evolved from sword-wielding warriors to sword-wielding bureaucrats. But what was the relationship between the shogun and the Japanese emperor? The Japanese emperors initially had significant power and exercised direct rule over their subjects, while the shoguns restricted themselves to war affairs. During this period, the shogunate was seen as one of the three main institutions governing people and property in Japan. Still, it was a small stakeholder in Japan's ruling structure. This gradually shifted, and the shogunate became the de facto political authority in Japan during the 17th century. While the emperor continued to be a figurehead, the shogunate held the real political power,